Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. Here with Jimmy Hinton, and guess who I have back with me this week?
Oh, Jimmy has his mom, and he's smiling big. There you go.
I'm not ashamed of you anymore.
Thank you, Jimmy. That made my day.
No, see, it's because I love you. It's because I cared. So we were quarantining last week, right. And now my whole family is sick, except for my middle child and myself. So they're all homesick today.
So Jimmy is just blowing germs on me.
And I've been coughing and sneezing on you to try to get you sick.
Thank you.
No. I wouldn't do that to you.
We're all good.
So some of you, or maybe all of you, I don't know, hopefully all of you, saw the CBN story that was, it aired this past Sunday. That was the story on our family. And if you didn't see it, you can just Google our names and put CBN after it, Christian Broadcasting Network, and you'll find the story. They did a fantastic job. I thought they did our story justice.
They did an amazing job, and I am so
shout out to Heather Stells.
Yes.
Heather was absolutely wonderful, and we got to know her pretty well throughout this process.
Yes.
And
special person, very much so.
So today we wanted to talk about. Kind of circle back. We talked about this a little bit before, but not in depth towards the beginning when we first started doing this podcast. But the inner turmoil that we feel as family members of abusers, and I think with the CBN story, I don't know about you, but like this whole since that aired on Sunday, I've been doing a lot of processing and. Just haven't been myself this week. And I didn't realize it would affect me like that, but it did.
I shared with Jimmy a little bit ago that just looking through pictures, finding pictures for that segment was so troubling to me to look back and look at family pictures when we thought we were a whole, wholesome family with no issues like we've dealt with. And to see that... and now feel the brokenness that we've gone through. That gave me migraine headache, and I actually went to bed for a while after that. It definitely created a turmoil within. Yeah. Definitely.
Well, you had said something, too, in that interview, which I thought was really powerful. And you said how, as the wife of an abuser, I expected support, that people would come to me and just give me a hug. Just come up and say, I'm sorry. And it never happened.
It did not. I realized that there was a shock for everyone. The shock waves were all around. And when we're in shock, we don't know what to say. Yeah. I had people, I would walk down the halls at work, and this is after everything was in the newspapers and had made headlines, and I had told a few private friends so that they knew and could give me some support, but even that was minimal. Yeah. Because I think, first and foremost, they didn't know what to say or how to react, but you don't have to say anything. Yeah. It's just, oh my goodness. My phone, I was waiting as I'm crying alone at night for someone to call, someone to knock at the door. It didn't happen. Yeah. And that's awful. Yeah. That's just, it leaves you.
I think it's more pronounced for the spouses of abusers. And I found this, in the last, 8 years of advocacy work, this is a huge theme that runs through every kind of abuse, whether it's spousal abuse, where the wives are being beaten, yes, or verbally assaulted, whether it's sexual abuse, their husband is a sexual abuser, whatever it is, it seems that the support for the spouse is not only non-existent, but the spouses are generally criticized very harshly.
I just shared with Jimmy before this podcast that since the airing of that segment on Sunday, I just had a lady last night come up to me and she said, I saw your video. And she said, it was really good. What a shame you didn't figure this all out before, years before. Well, I could feel myself just crumbling inside. Yes, it's a shame. It's horrible. And I feel horrible about it every day of my life.
Yeah.
And I will probably till the day I die. How I wish I had picked up on things. I didn't.
Right. Yeah, none of us did.
None of us did.
That was
Nobody
the big thing
did.
that I thought Heather did a brilliant job.
It was wonderful.
Really telling that story
Yes.
that, this wasn't about people who didn't want to know, because clearly we took action. The second we found out,
immediately.
we took very swift action. Right. You and I reported to the police. So it wasn't a matter of, we turned a blind eye to it, or we just were naive and didn't want to know about it. It was that we didn't see it. That abusers are highly sophisticated, and they're really, really good at hiding abuse in plain sight.
Absolutely.
And we all missed it.
And we did. And I think there is that critical eye always, that questioning critical eye that we deal with in the aftermath from the community or from others who, just kind of shaking their head like, really? You lived with that man for almost 40 years and you didn't pick up something?
Yeah.
No.
I was telling you, I saw some comments that, and it was just a handful. So fortunately it wasn't a lot, but, people would make comments. You mean this went on for 40 years and nobody picked up on it? I find that hard to believe. And
it is hard to believe. It's hard for us to believe.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. But
that's an ignorant thing to say, too.
It is.
So anybody who's writing that, quit it. Knock it off.
Yeah. But I think that's something that we deal with, those of us who now, this whole abuse thing is part of our families. We deal with it. We struggle with that. And I think it's good for us to talk about it because that helps diminish the pain of that struggle.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to talk about, two different areas. One is the basically two different perspectives. So the inner turmoil that we experience as family members of an abuser. The one is, how do people view me? And then the second perspective is, how do I view myself? So, we'll start with, how do people view me? Because we really worry about that. And I'm not the kind of person who really cares what people think about me. I think that's driven by personality. I've never really cared what people think about me.
And let me interject. Jimmy doesn't get that from me. I do care.
Yeah, I think most people do, but I think part of that's personality, but part of that's being in ministry. You get criticized so much about the stupidest things in ministry that you just learn to let it roll off your shoulders.
And some people are more callous to that, or have a harder shell. I never have.
But with that said, when this all broke back in 2011. We were just talking about this before we recorded, but I had a 15-month-old baby. My oldest daughter was 15 months at the time of the arrest, and I didn't. I was in such shock over the double life and knowing that he abused little infants in the most severe way. That I was paranoid. I was worried about what my wife thought about me changing her diapers. And so I just stopped. I mean, there was a period, and I talked to several of my brothers who experienced the same thing, and they said, we actually, and the only way that I can describe it, I can describe it for myself, but I talked to some of my brothers who experienced the same thing. We physically felt sick to our stomach at the thought of changing our own kids' diapers, because we were so worried that, which, looking back, it's kind of silly, but we were so worried that our wife would suspect that we were abusing our own kids.
Jimmy, it's silly, but it's not. It's real, and I think all of you boys shared that with me. And even your brother, the one who is not yet married, he came to me and he said, I'm scared to be around my nieces and nephews alone. He said, I don't know what the boys will think. He said, and he is a fun guy.
Oh,
he loves to have fun with the kids and all the time.
And the kids love him.
And they love him.
My kids absolutely adore him.
And I've noticed even in his interactions yet to this day, he's more reserved.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely he is.
He's so aware.
Yeah.
Aware of every move that he makes, aware of every eye that's on him. We all are. And it changes you. Yeah. It just changes. It does. Yes, it does. And it's a real struggle. And we are concerned, especially like you with a wife. I think of you boys often. How do your wives deal with this? Knowing your dad is sitting in prison for these grievous acts on children, many that he knew, most, I guess he knew all.
Right, he knew all of them.
He knew all of them. And now I'm married to the son of a pedophile. And there's jokes made, and there are things people can be, when they're not aware, you're sitting in a group and it's another Petty was arrested. I hope he rots in prison. Things like that. When you're a family member of this action, this abuse, it's tough. Yeah, it's very tough, and I really don't hear people talking about it. And I think there needs to be support for that.
Well, I've heard people. I've heard and seen people make comments like that. When a pedophile is outed, or they go to prison or whatever. Of course, comments aren't always the best place to find the best of society, but regardless, I've personally heard people say things like, "Well, I wonder how deep this runs in the family." Yeah. Well, the implication is, I wonder if this person's sons are abusing kids too. Right. If they had this inner familial pedophile network going on in the family, and it's just assumed that. If somebody's an abuser and this runs really far and deep, that it had to have been going on in the family, or at least it could have been going on in the family, and so people entertain that. Well, that's not helpful at all for us family members, because we hate that a family member who we loved and trusted and thought that we knew. It is an abuser of the worst kind.
It's painful just sitting here talking, the two of us. It's very painful. It's painful to think of it. Yeah. And so that's a pain that thousands and thousands are carrying right now that we felt needed to be addressed.
Well, that was something else that you had talked about too, which, I actually never thought about this, which is interesting that you had thought about this as a mother. I hadn't thought about this as a son and a sibling. But the genetic factor, is this something that's genetic?
Immediately I thought about it.
That never crossed my mind.
God forbid, I kept thinking to myself, is this genetic? Because I'm not educated, at the time was not educated at all on abuse, pedophiles. I was totally naive. And my first thought was, what is going on? What about my boys? Is this something they're dealing with and I don't know it? So, and other people struggle with that. They think about it too.
What about as a wife, what was the big thing that you feared that people are viewing you through a certain lens?
Oh, I feared that they would think that I knew and I did the big cover-up, that I was just turned a blind eye and let it go on. I still feel that I criticize myself, which is not good, but I still feel, when I talk with people within the community, because they loved your dad, loved your dad, and I feel like a lot of people think I betrayed him. I had someone point a finger in my face and say, if you had been a better wife, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, if you would have just supported him more. Yeah.
And that about half killed me. That really did.
Yeah.
that comment. It had nothing to do, his actions, nothing to do with me being a good wife.
It had nothing to do with any of us.
No,
it had to do with a selfish person who's an abuser of the worst kind.
Very sinful person.
Yeah.
But when that comment is put out there, when that seed is planted, you struggle with it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I hear spouses all the time. Same thing. I mean, even women who are being beaten by their husbands. Right. Well, and churches are the absolute worst. At asking questions like this, but what did you do to make them upset?
It? What did you
as if beating your spouse is ever okay?
Are you supportive of him?
Yeah.
Do you help him?
Or affairs or
all of those
or sexual abuse of minor. I mean, all those things.
What did you do to cause this?
And even if it's not outright asked, it's certainly implied a lot of the times.
The implication is there, and you pick up on it.
Sure, but when you're going to counseling. And churches, too, whenever they suggest that an abusive spouse goes to counseling with the spouse who they're abusing, first of all, I think that's a horrible idea.
It is.
I'll just say that outright.
Right.
But then to have to sit there while they're pretending to be all broken over what they did and they're so remorseful if they even admit anything. And then to have to sit there and hear, well, what are some things that you could do that they're saying to the spouse who's being abused? Yes. What are some things that you could do to help him along, to help him find healing and to stop doing, these sins? What are things that you could do to contribute to that?
Keep in
That's
mind,
awful.
Jimmy,
That's absolutely
keep in
awful.
mind it's a double whammy because the abuser, in most cases, knows how to manipulate the spouse or to trigger and to really hurt. Your dad from prison wrote me letters, and of course I never responded, but they always started out with, "It's up to you to hold our family together." No, it's not. It was not up to me. It is not up to me.
That's right.
He broke the family. I didn't.
Yeah.
But he put that burden on me. And, immediately I thought, and you do, I have to do something. I have to keep everybody together. I have to hold it together myself. I can't fall apart because it's my job to keep everybody together. And you grieve and you hurt on a whole different level. It really is.
Well, and that's what abusers do. They constantly shift the responsibility and the blame to other people. So, the implication there is if the family's doing really poorly and if people are struggling with depression and if they're, if family members are struggling with drug and alcohol addictions or whatever it is, that you're the one who didn't hold the family together. You didn't do a good enough job.
Tough burden. It's a struggle.
It's not your burden.
No,
that's not your burden to do.
And when you're hurting, of course, you're vulnerable to all kinds of pain like that. So that is something I think that I believe anyway, a lot of spouses of abusers deal with too.
Yeah. Well, we'll shift the perspective a little bit and say, how do we view ourselves? As family members of an abuser, I talked about how maybe this was more of an internal struggle, but the whole diaper changing thing. But really that was worrying about how other people viewed me. But as far as how do I view myself, I know that I am really, really, really careful with all of my interactions, everything from every word that I say to hand placement to where my eyes go. I mean, I am hyper vigilant within myself to the point where I really do worry about all that stuff. Not because I'm afraid I'm going to abuse anybody, but because I know how abusers.
Yeah,
and that people are watching you, and that people are suspicious, and so
and they want to see if you're walking your talk too.
Yeah, but I think we have incredible vulnerabilities, especially as a family who we're very public about the things that we did, and that's difficult. I know a lot of times I feel pretty crappy about myself just because my wife is the total opposite. She doesn't want any publicity, and she, not that I want publicity. I certainly don't.
It's not publicity. It's just.
I want to share knowledge. I want to share,
right.
I felt like I couldn't lay my head on the pillow at night knowing the things that we knew and continue to learn and be silent about that. I can't be silent.
Right.
And so, my wife and my kids, I worry about my kids. When I'm in the public eye, that exposes my family. And
absolutely.
We're under a microscope. I shared with one of our church members recently, I said, every single word that I say, every word that I say is under the microscope. It's scrutinized. Somebody just posted something yesterday on Twitter, a response to something that I wrote, and asked if it was defamation. The implication is, and it was about, Matt Chandler, and he had misled his congregation when he gave a report about a child abuser who he said has no affiliation with the church. Well, this guy was their youth minister at the village church for 11 years. And he was just indicted, and he was charged. And so I had talked about, he misled, and one of the words that I used, I said he lied to the congregation. Well, this person right away, you said lied, and then he tagged Matt Chandler in it and said, is this defamation? Well, you have those kinds of people out there who are, they're ready for you to say one wrong word, and everything that we do is under the microscope, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it.
And by saying we, Jimmy, we're not just talking about us, our family. It's anyone.
Survivors who come forward, who tell their story. People want to know details.
These are the struggles within that all survivors who have spoken out will deal with it. Maybe not to the degree that some do. Some are more public than others, but certainly these are all struggles that we as family members of abusers deal with,
or victims of abusers,
or victims of abuse.
Because when they go public with their story, and if I think that we're under the microscope, they're really under the microscope.
It's like stripping yourself bare in front of everyone, baring your soul and saying, "Here I am, broken. Here's what happened. Support me."
I saw an interesting thing, and I don't remember who had posted this, but they said about Dr. Ford, when she came forward with the whole Kavanaugh hearing, that was so public.
Oh, very.
And she was, she was absolutely crucified for the whole world to see. And it was publicly broadcast, and and I'm not, I'm not here to argue one way or the other, whether I think she's telling the truth or not. That's not the point. The point is this. She was absolutely just
she was
raked over. She was raked over the coals, and every single detail. They wanted to know everything. And so somebody had posted this just the other day, and they said because of the Kavanaugh hearing and the way that went down, they said, our fear is that just pushed all these survivors even further into the corner where they're petrified to come forward now.
It's tough because when you are not believed, when you expose yourself and to all of the criticisms and to the public eye, and it is seriously like you are bare. There's nothing, no secret anymore. It's out. And when that happens and you stand before everyone, it's a really scary feeling.
Well, we do something else too. We do this too, mostly in the public eye and in the churches, but we say, the burden of proof is on the victim to prove that they were abused and not the other way around. We don't place the burden of proof on the accused to prove that they didn't do it. Right. We flip that around and we say, well, we want to know every detail. We want you to prove. We want the hardcore evidence, and we want every T crossed and every I dotted, and we want to know that beyond the shadow of a doubt that this happened. So my advice is for people in churches, and I said this in that CBN interview, Heather had asked me the question, she said, you had so much to lose whenever you reported. And I said, I had everything to lose.
You did.
And she said, then why was it such a snap decision to report? Right. And I said, my answer was, well, because I had to know. I had to know the truth. And I wasn't the one in a position to get to the truth. That's what professional investigators are trained to do that.
I appreciated, Jimmy, your response to that question.
Yeah.
Because you had nothing to gain by going to report your dad. You had everything to lose.
Yeah.
But what I will forever be so thankful for you, for Alex, who's in this interview also. There was no hesitation. You were stripped bare. You were willing to just open up.
No, I mean, my wife and I had that conversation.
Yeah.
I sat down with her that day, the day that Alex came and talked to me. I went home and I talked to my wife and I said, I said, here's what I found out. And I said, I really don't know what's going to happen. I said, we had just bought our home, not even 2 years prior to that. We weren't even in that house for 2 years.
You were just young.
Our job.
I like to think of you as just young kids, young family.
Yeah, I mean,
little baby.
I'd only been preaching for just over 2 years.
Yeah.
All these things. So we went through the whole thing, and I said, I really don't. We could lose all of this, and we could have to move out of state. And I said, but I have to report this, no matter what the outcome is. I have to report this. And she looked at me and she said, you do what you need to do.
And she's a keeper, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
She is a keeper.
Yeah.
And the good news is that you didn't lose everything.
No.
Not at all.
No.
God is using you and Alex and myself in amazing ways to help others, build a community of support. And I think we want to end on a positive note rather than leave everybody with, we have all these inner struggles and inner turmoil and it's going to be years and years of this.
Yeah, no, that's just part of the process.
That's part of the process, and I appreciate you calling that a process. It is a process.
Yeah.
And it does take time to process it, but leave us on a good note, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, just the more you talk about it, the more you process, the more you heal, and I think probably just as important as all that is the more you learn. It's not, speaking up is not about teaching other people. At least it's not for us.
Right.
Speaking up is about building community and learning from other people. And we're constantly being stretched. We're constantly growing. We're constantly learning, and that's never going to stop. So, if we ever get the arrogance that, we're these experts on child sexual abuse and you need to sit at our feet and learn from us, knock us off that pedestal pretty quickly, because that's not the position that we need to take. So that's the positive note, is that the more you talk about it, the more you process, the more you heal, the more you learn. And that it's a cyclical process.
The more children will be protected.
And it empowers other people to speak up. So we'll leave you with this truth bomb today. Tell your truth to people who will understand. Surround yourself with that community of people who understand. They are out there. They do exist, and there's a lot of them. So if people are not understanding you or they're criticizing you, don't keep going back to them. They're miserable company. Trust me.
I'm going to put a little plug in on your truth bomb for people to tune in next week when we actually talk about Porch Swing Ministries, which is a result
we're going to be interviewing Christine
building a
Parker.
Community where we can get help.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.